Welcome to the Long Take Review, a film podcast with one eye always on the Oscar race. I'm your host, Jen Subchakcha Bankard, and I'm here with a merc with a mouth. It's Greg Cass. How's it going, Greg?
I had another Liam Neeson nightmare. I kidnapped his daughter, and he just wasn't having it. They made 3 of those movies. At some point, you have to wonder if he's just a bad parent. I'm good, Jen. It's hard to find Deadpool quotes that are funny and not going to get us an explicit tag.
I was also thinking that. I was kind of like, oh, usually we keep the show pretty PG-13, even mostly PG, I want to say. And so that to have to suddenly reference Deadpool movies, I might get us into trouble. But I think we'll be okay. So listeners, those were references, as it's probably made apparent now, to the 2 characters who are headlining, or at least one character, Deadpool. But we are talking today about 2 characters who are headlining what might be one of the summer's biggest movies, Deadpool and Wolverine. So this is kind of our retrospective, but also a preview to get us excited for the new movie that's coming up. It's going to be in theaters on July 26th. So Greg and I are going to kind of look back at the cinematic histories of Deadpool and Wolverine, and kind of end with sort of a preview of like our thoughts about how they might, as the marketing material makes it very clear, come together in the upcoming film. Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool and especially Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, they're in so many movies. That's the major problem we ran up to in preparing for this, is that there are just too many movies that we could talk about. So we're not necessarily going to get super granular about each one, but kind of look at the bigger picture and hone in on specific films sort of as needed as they come up as we want to talk about them. Here's the deal with spoilers. We're going to do kind of light spoilers because, in talking about these past old movies, it's going to be hard to not to talk about what happens in them, but we're going to try to keep it super broad and avoid sort of major plot points, so that it's enough that if you haven't watched these movies or you haven't revisited them in a long time, this should be a good guide for what you might want to go back and watch before you hit the theaters for Deadpool and Wolverine. But first, Greg, if listeners don't find us relentlessly annoying after listening to this episode, what can they do?
Jen, that's not possible. There's nobody left in that category, but we will pretend. So if you are interested in hearing us break the fourth wall, just like I just did, if you don't want to miss new episodes when they drop, please follow the Long Take Review wherever you get your podcasts. All the services are good. We really appreciate the downloads. We, of course, host the feed on Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. What a great website. I think they have some really amazing House of Dragon and Acolyte reviews going on right now. But you can also find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, and more. Or you can find us on social media, particularly Instagram and Threads at The Long Take Review. And the only social media that matters, Letterboxd. We're at LTR Pod, sharing what we are watching using the hashtag LTR Pod.
Thanks, Greg. All right, we are now ready to get into our discussion of Deadpool and Wolverine. So, Greg, we'll start with, what is your past relationship to either of these characters? Like, what was your orientation to them relative to the rest of, let's say, the Marvel universe?
It's such an odd franchise, right? And I'm going to lump them together in kind of the mutant verse as it has stood seemingly up until this point. Because it's one that I never rush out for. I often see these movies on like second, third week of release. And like, I'm not usually too disappointed. I'm not going to talk about the Dark Phoenix. But I will say, like, it's crazy to believe that these have been going on since 2000. And in the case of Hugh Jackman, he's been playing this character since 2000. If Jen was catching me doing some background Googling, I'm not as slick at it as PT is. I was trying to figure out if Hugh Jackman ranks up near the top of the list of like portraying the same character for the longest amount of time. The simple answer is no. There are like soap opera stars that have been doing this for like 60 years or something like that.
Okay.
But
what about movies?
Still, I couldn't determine. It seems like there are a lot of contenders, and 24 is a long time though. So I'll keep Googling in the background next time whatever you're saying is a rant.
I feel like his only competition would be like Sean Connery as James Bond or something. You know what I mean? Like, in terms of
Well, and so
stretches.
many of those long-term characters have had something like the Doctor or Bond have switched actors. So, and it's a really interesting kind of attachment because it makes me think it's going to be so hard for somebody else to take it on. And so I will say I feel very attached to Wolverine in particular because I've been on that whole journey. I was looking at the list of mutant movies. I think I've only missed The New Mutants, which I don't believe Wolverine appears in, but I've otherwise kind of seen all of his moments. And a favorite of mine is X-Men First Class, which he's got one scene and it's just brilliant and like so much fun. So I find myself showing up for this movie not despite Deadpool, but because of Wolverine personally, that I just feel attached to him and to Hugh Jackman. Poor man has had to stay in incredible shape that long too, which I think we forget sometimes as well, until the gratuitous shirtless scene, which I think they tossed into Apocalypse just to really make you know that Hugh Jackman still got it. So,
Yeah.
but if I'm talking about Hugh Jackman's abs, I think that means I've answered the question. Jen, what's your attachment to these questions? To these characters?
So, uh, I would say the X-Men were my entry point into not only superhero movies, but probably superhero storytelling in general. It's because I was one of the OG X-Men animated series fans.
Mm.
Like that was one of the core animated series that I watched growing up as a kid. It was that Batman the animated series and Gargoyles. Shout out to Gargoyles.
Hey.
Really, really obscure. No one cares about Gargoyles now, but
No, that's not true. There's comic books, there's Funko Pops, there's a Gargoyles horde out there.
okay.
You're not alone.
So for me, like I was a fan of X-Men long before I read any comic book because of
Mm.
the animated series, and then as you're saying, the X-Men comic book movies, or the Bryan Singer X-Men movies. Uh and so yeah, I have a pretty heavy attachment to Hugh Jackman as Wolverine and just Wolverine as a character. I have since, like as an adult, I've gone back and read a bunch of Wolverine centric comics. But I haven't necessarily for Deadpool. So here's the thing: is like I'm always happy to see Deadpool. Like he amuses me to a great deal. But I'm like you're saying, I'm not gonna because his brand of humor is not necessarily my go-to because
Mm.
it's just a little too rude for my natural tendencies, I think. But I love his breaking of the fourth wall. So
Mm.
like and the kind of constant references to pop culture. And so, when the first Deadpool movie came out, I was kind of like, yeah, sure, I'll go see that. And then was like, oh wow, this is actually pretty amazing. I really like it. So yeah, so I'm pretty excited for Deadpool and Wolverine, but my history is a lot more with Wolverine than with Deadpool, I would say. Because I
Well,
don't think I've actually read a single Deadpool comic ever.
mm.
Um,
I want to make sure I have my Jen Subchakchai Banker backstory correct. You got engaged while dressed as an X-Men, right?
you're gonna bring that up, right?
Of course, because that's nerd cred to the max.
That is true. That's true. Yes. So, when my husband John proposed to me, we were in Disneyland for a Halloween party, like a Halloween event, and where they kind of give everybody like trick or treat bags and stuff. And so people are, it's like the one time you're allowed to go to the parks in a full costume. And so he was Gambit, I was Rogue, and he proposed to me like by putting a ring in my Halloween candy bag, next to the trash can, next to the Matterhorn. Yeah, so obviously, yeah, this is our that yeah, you're right, that story alone sort of shows how invested I am in the X-Men. The other thing too is my son's name is Logan, low key, because well, because of Wolverine and also Creed 2. um because so spoiler, actually major spoiler for Creed 2 coming up in a second. So when I was in the hospital about to deliver my son, I was not sure about his name. My daughter's name is Athena. We were leaning towards Apollo to kind of
Mm.
go with the mythology sort of pattern. And so in the hospital, I'm kind of waiting around, and I put on the TV and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to watch Creed 2. because
Mm.
because of Apollo. I don't know. It was like, and then what ended up happening was, and this is the spoiler, the end of that movie, you find out that Rocky's grandson is named Logan. Like the
Mm.
baby's at the end of the movie is named Logan. And so I
Okay.
was like, well, that's it. Like, and then he was born. So yeah, that's a long, yeah. How did you get me down memory lane?
I don't know.
Apparently
That's
there's a
amazing.
lot of connections to this.
I did not know that second piece of the story, so that's really cool as well. Honestly, I think it's a better story if you change it from Disneyland at Halloween to like you guys were just chilling one night dressed as X-Men, like around the house, and
That would be
you
great.
switch. So, and just killer choice. Knowing John and John's appearance, he makes a good Gambit. Actually,
He's a really
like
good Gambit.
he can
Yes.
do his hair that way, I'm sure, and very cool. Well, and I think I've shared this already in the podcast, but knowing we have new listeners all the time, we were having a discussion in one of my classes this fall or I think it was this spring, doesn't matter, where we were talking about kind of art versus artist, right? Like, what do you do when you love a piece of art, but the artist is problematic? And, so we were talking about like J.K. Rowling now and some examples of this. And somebody brought up like, then there's these ones these artists you do like, but you kind of almost expect them to get outed sometime soon as a scumbag. And so I was like, oh yes, I know exactly what you mean. That's how I feel about Ryan Reynolds. I have never in my 15 years of teaching had a room flip on me so fast than me saying that. They all were like ready to throw chairs at me and just say like, what are you talking
take that
about?
Back.
He's so great. Like, how can you say that? And it's fascinating to me. And I share this to be self-deprecating, but also just to note that like he has a passionate fan base that I feel like I am always just on the outside of. Like, I appreciate Ryan Reynolds. For me, he kind of does this one thing and he does it really well. And even when you see him being quote unquote real in his like Welcome to Wrexham documentary, it's like, it's just his shtick. And I appreciate it, but I agree with you that it's not, for Deadpool, it definitely shifts more R-rated, which I think probably cools both of us on it. But in general, like, I kind of like it sometimes, but I'm also like, you've had a really long career of doing this. So PT also called me out because I confessed the last time I had watched Deadpool 2, I gave it a 1-star review on Letterboxd. And he said, that's pure Ryan Reynolds hate right there, which he's probably not wrong. I did give it a better rating this time around because it's not a 1-star movie. It may not be a 5-star movie, but it's certainly not a 1-star movie. So I will say I'm excited for another chance to appreciate Deadpool, but kind of feel the same way you do. I think because everybody has imitated Deadpool, there's a chance that I'm kind of over that type of humor for that reason, right? Even if, the imitators are lesser, they've kind of overwhelmed the original in so many ways. But I don't know. What's your feeling on the larger Ryan Reynolds universe?
Well, so the thing I'll say is that I think what makes the Deadpool movies successful is because his shtick is so perfectly aligned with the character of Deadpool. And that's the sort of magic that happens, that suddenly you're like, oh, wait, this is somehow in this context, it's really charming and funny. And I'm constantly laughing, as opposed to maybe in some other context where he's doing the same bit that you're kind of like, okay, Ryan Reynolds, whatever. Right. And I generally like Ryan Reynolds, I think, but I think there's, what was that video game movie that he was in? Is it Free Guy?
Free Guy, not Fall Guy, which
Right.
about
Free
half
Guy.
of critics reviewing Fall Guy this year called it Free Guy. But
Free
yes,
Guy.
Free Guy.
But like something like that, or even like, I don't know if you ever watched the Christmas movie that he did with Will Ferrell a couple years ago, Spirited, I think it's called, which is actually not bad as a Christmas, like as a like kind of campy Christmas movie, but it's the same thing where he's like, I'm just rude all the time. I'm doing, you know what I mean? Like, and it's,
Yep.
and so you're right. I think it is weird that we keep asking him to do the same thing, but then there's some secret sauce when he's doing it as Deadpool that makes it better than everything else. But yeah, so I'm like, I actually don't have any bias against Ryan Reynolds, but like, I would love to see him branch out and do other things. Like it didn't, like not these types of comedies or whatever. I think that would be be great. But it is, and when you bring up Wrexham, and I think it is really funny to hear him talking about like being very knowledgeable about business,
Mm.
but with his voice, where you're like, wait a minute, like is Deadpool talking to me about how they turn this football team around? But yeah, so yeah, I think that yeah, there's something magical about it. Um, and I think we've started inching towards looking back at the past movies. So I'll just ask you, like, which ones, as I said, there are a lot. And we kind of were like really struggling to do rewatches in preparation for this, or at least I was, because there's just too much. But which of the movies on either side, Deadpool or Wolverine side, sort of stand out?
The other thing that's fascinating about the rewatch is you expand across such a like history of the comic book genre. So those early Bryan Singer ones, especially the first one, you're like, this is not this is not the language of film we use anymore. And it's this kind of old style with weird editing, or editing that appears weird now. So having just gone through all the Spider-Man movies with my son this year, it's actually very similar because it's roughly the same time frame across that. So I had much love for those original ones, particularly X2 is always on my list of like top superhero movies of all time. It's aged a little better than the first one. But I'm going to say by far the standout for me is Logan. And maybe this is not a controversial saying, but it feels like so often they're trying to get Wolverine right. And it is a different and a very specifically different Wolverine that's coming to us in Logan, but it's like they finally absolutely nailed it. So as I rewatched all of these, I got to just, even if it's a hacky letterbox take, I got to say Logan stood out above the rest. Do you have warm memories of Logan?
I do. And I just remember being so blown away, being like, yeah, sort of like they did it. They did. They made a gritty, sort of elevated comic book story. Like, and what's interesting is that, like, I feel like this is the closest to the tone of what it's like reading some of the older comics.
Mm.
Um, that you get, as opposed to, like, because I think the was it the Wolverine, the one where he goes to Japan?
Yep.
Actually, the plot of that, Hugh's maybe closer to like an actual comic run, but the tone is just like way off. Whereas, like, yeah, Logan, I think what it did so well was that it captured sort of the sort of like grittiness and the dystopian sort of feel that you often get when you're reading a Wolverine centric comic. And also just like in general, the movie is amazing. And yeah, I think what's interesting looking back at the Wolverine movies in particular, or the movies that Wolverine appears in, it's the depth, because I think it can be really easy to do a caricature of Wolverine. So even in actually those early Bryan Singer movies, oftentimes he's just grumpy,
Mm.
right? And that's it. And I think that's only half of his character, right? The whole point is that he is really not very personable and comes across as kind of an anti-hero, but on the inside is an actual hero, right? And that
Mm.
he does still waters run deep. Like, he really does have, like, a good heart and big feelings, and stuff like that. It doesn't come out overtly very often. And I think when you can get that sort of thing right, where everyone, like, sort of like wants to put him in the anti-hero bucket, but he refuses. I think that's kind of like that's what the appeal, for me at least, of Wolverine as a character is. And I think if you look at a lot of these movies, there really is, like, the mileage really varies in terms of
Yeah.
how well they nail that. Because I feel like back in the and I love those Bryan Singer movies, especially the first two. I think once we get into Dark Phoenix territory, it gets off the rails. But those first two movies, it really is so much about the love triangle, like, of
Mm.
how he wants to be with Jean Grey. And then poor Anna Paquin is like, but I'm right here. And, like, you know what I mean? Like, and he's just kind of the grumpy, like, sad character, in a
Mm.
lot of ways. And I feel like that's just scratching the surface. Like, that's really, in a lot of ways, reductive of what his character can do. And I think that's sort of what Logan is able to achieve. Um, but yeah.
I think I was gonna say in response to the first half of your comment, I think where that Wolverine comes out in those Bryan Singer movies is actually the relationship with Rogue. But when it's
Mm,
more master apprentice or, friend, father figure, perhaps, I think those kind of quieter moments work really well. But it is the connection between him and Famke Janssen's Jean Grey. I just never quite felt. And in the rewatch, the Wolverine features a lot of these moments where there's just beautiful Famke Janssen in bed and he's like remembering her as he dies at different times in different fights. And it's like, it just never worked for me because I didn't feel like those characters that ever really had the history that the films seem to imply they do. And maybe that's my failure as somebody who hasn't read them. But on screen, it was like, yeah, they kind of made eyes at each other. There was always the kind of Scott is the goody two shoes, and Wolverine's the bad boy who I just can't resist. And like it became so thin as particularly you get into the third, the X-Men: The Last Stand, that I think it really fell apart. I will just in passing, in case we don't come back to it in our discussion of the big ones, I will say X-Men: The Last Stand always stays in my memory because it's the only time I've ever been at a movie where a guy literally stood up in the middle and was like, "What? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me right now?" And just like stormed out
wow.
because he couldn't take it anymore. Which I assume he was a deep comic reader who really loved it and hated. I think that might have been when they killed Professor X. Kind of vague spoiler for that. That's not that vague a spoiler for that movie, but we will. It's been out a long time. We'll try to keep it pretty broad, but so I think some of that kind of tainted my viewing, perhaps. But I think by the time you get to Logan, you just are seeing new sides of the character. And, the R rating really helps because
Yeah.
it helps to back to your point, say, like, yeah, he can be this really good, heroic guy, but the nature of his superpowers is he's going to make a mess, not just kill people, but make a mess of people. And you need some of that to get the character fully.
I just want to give a shout out to the X-Men First Class and Days of Future Past.
Mhm.
I think those movies are a lot less focused, as you mentioned earlier, on Wolverine. But as X-Men movies, I think they're pretty good. Like but that's mostly I think because of the James McAvoy, Michael Fassbender factor,
Mhm.
and not necessarily like I don't know if I necessarily remember Hugh Jackman as Wolverine's parts in those movies as much. But I didn't get a chance to rewatch those super recently, so maybe that's why. Um,
Well,
but yeah,
I think
mhm.
you're right that those really nailed the kind of X-Men vibes, and I think they benefited a lot from being period pieces. And we know nothing, but the rumors are that Fantastic Four is going to be a period piece, and I'm hoping they can kind of grab some of that juice, some of that energy, and bring that to it. The first one, you'll recall, Hugh Jackman only has one scene where they McAvoy and Fassbender come in to recruit him, and he essentially says "screw off." I believe they might actually get the F word in there, but sends them away. And then in the second one, it's actually they do a lot of fish out of water for Wolverine because he's the one who time travels to recruit the old ones. But I think those are perhaps the better X-Men movies, but he just gets lost in them. Exactly what you said. So here's my fresh question for you, Jen. When you think about this franchise, I think it's safe to say it's the Deadpool franchise is just beloved. Like the people who like these movies love these movies. So when you returned to it, what stands out to you as like the driving passion that you think these movies garner?
So the thing that surprised me the most that I had sort of forgotten is that Deadpool 1 is kind of a rom-com. Like or has heavy rom-com elements. And I think at the end of the day, people might say that they really love these movies because of the humor and because of the breaking of the fourth wall. And I obviously think that's important. That needs to be done right for these movies to be successful. But what's interesting is I realized this time around, I'm like, wait, it's because we spend so much time establishing what he cares about, right?
Mm.
And like giving him that grounding in a place of love, right? Because they like the yeah, the first half of Deadpool, the first Deadpool movie is like a meet cute with Vanessa, and like, and then I guess spoilers for the first Deadpool movie, he finds out he has cancer, and that's that the fact that that is what leads him to become Deadpool, because he's trying to make it so that Vanessa doesn't have to suffer through him dying of cancer, right? Like that is what really grounds the story emotionally in a way that I didn't remember. And was like, huh, they actually do spend a lot of time establishing the heart of his character, so that when he's, because the movie obviously starts with very classic Deadpool. He's shenanigans, right? The opening fight
Mm.
scene where he's counting down the bullets and stuff like that is ridiculously funny, but he's already fully cooked as Deadpool, right? And so his irreverence and his quippiness and his like uh rude jokes and stuff like that, they're all just there. But then what the movie does so smartly is that it pauses and is like, no, here's the emotional grounding underneath all of that, right? Here's what he's trying to kind of like uh display. What's the right word? I'm looking for the psychology word, like displace, or like he's trying to project, or no, mask maybe, which, considering we're talking about superheroes, I guess is fitting. You know what I mean? Like that he's that his humor and him being so annoying is a kind of a coping mechanism for all this emotional stuff underneath. And actually going into, I might be jumping the gun a little bit, but looking ahead at like the trailer for this next movie, Deadpool and Wolverine, it's clear they haven't lost that, right? Because the trailer opens with, I'm fighting for all of this. Like they show Vanessa and all of his friends. You know what I mean? Like so I think that's the key to the success of these as movies, at least. I don't know. What do you think?
I think that's really an astute point. That they, I would almost frame it too as like the opening scene of Deadpool 1 is like, here's exactly what you want and what you worried we weren't going to give you. Here's some gore, here's some quipping, here's all of that. Like, I think they fall victim at times to leaning into the, hey, look at us, we're R-rated now. Isn't this fantastic? Here are some gratuitous sex and violence. But like, I do think that it was important at that time to prove that superheroes could do that in a way. We've since had other iterations, and something like Suicide Squad and its television show, I and The Boys have really pushed all those envelopes more and more. But at the time, I think it was really important to be like, this is different. This is not kind of the Technicolor marvels you thought it was. But I really like your argument, and we'll classify it as an argument, that it's actually the second piece that's so important to that. And I do wonder, though, in terms of audience response, if they all recognize what you just articulated, right? Because I think a lot of the diehard Deadpool fans, which I think they're out there, and it's more the like quirky weirdos from your high school class, whereas the like fake macho tough guys have the Punisher stickers on their trucks now, and they are trucks. Not Deadpool, but Deadpool has a certain kind of snarky appeal that draws in some slightly weirder crowd than the Punisher crowd.
Their stickers are on e-bikes, like what?
Yes. So decided. But I do think that a lot of people who love this movie, I think the humor really is what for me sets it apart. And you talked about how not being sure what you were going to get, and I think it's the slow-mo opening credits, and they fly by the like sexiest man in the world, People magazine, and it was like, okay, like they're going to take the piss out of themselves. And I think that was so important when this came out, because that's the moment we were doing like Avengers movies where the stakes were everything in the world, and this is the deepest, most philosophical thing you can possibly imagine, and we'll end with the Vision asking Ship of Theseus questions. That's not the right time period, but it's like we tried to do all this kind of sanctimonious philosophizing, and I think Deadpool immediately lets the air out of that. It's like, let's just be dumb and celebrate being dumb, and then do what you said of giving him real emotional stakes. I think that's the magic trick, it feels to me.
Also, like, my favorite thing about Deadpool when I'm watching these movies is like just the sheer volume of pop culture references. Like your
Mhm.
opening quote was like making fun of Liam Neeson and Taken, right? And that's, you just never know what kind, and there's like, it really does seem like nothing is out of bounds. And I don't mean that in terms of appropriateness of content. I just mean in terms of like, you never know what they're going to reach for and make fun of, and it's just really fun. So that I kind of was like, when I was rewatching the first Deadpool, I fell back into and was like, oh yeah, this is so fun. Like, um,
Well,
and yeah,
I've been listening to a lot of podcasts and reading articles because this is the sad life I live. But I like the Mike Schur shows, The Good Place, which comes up a lot in Acolyte discussions these days, and Parks and Rec. And one of the things they always did on those shows that made it successful is they would do takes that were the real dialogue in the script, and then they would every single scene do at least one fun run where the actors could just try whatever they wanted, and if they found something they could do something additional. And it feels to me like the first Deadpool, they just leave the fun run in. It's like you get the dialogue, and then like there are scenes in particular where Ryan Reynolds or TJ Miller, who we aren't allowed to like anymore for good reasons, but he's in these movies, so we'll
oh,
acknowledge
that's
his
right.
existence. But they just kind of get a chance to give like four jokes, and they're like alternative lines on the same thing. Like when he first sees Deadpool's face stands out of my memory, and TJ Miller's character gets like four takes, and then they're all there, and they work. And it's those things you mentioned, it's the pop culture references, it's something sometimes really off color, or you laugh and then you're like, oh, I just laughed at something really disturbing. And I think that kind of humor is, it's there's something cathartic about it, because it's like, if I see that in internet comments, I don't let myself laugh. I'm like, I'm too sophisticated and I'm too smart to appreciate these jokes. But when they've softened you up with two or three, you're cackling and you're like, oh, it feels really good to purge that emotion and be like, yeah, I would never tell somebody they look like an avocado had sex with a piece of leather or something like that. But you laugh and have a good time, and I think that can feel freeing to this audience that wants to break out of their kind of strict roles.
Yeah, I really like that, and I think part of the success of this upcoming movie is really going to hinge on how much they can deliver on that specifically, but for the Disney factor. Because
Mm.
they've made those jokes of like, well, Feige won't let me talk about cocaine, right? Or like there's a joke where, well, I'm not gonna repeat the joke necessarily, but like there's a
There's a
joke where he
joke
was
in
like,
the Red Band trailer that is very prominently sexual that they have edited out of a lot of trailers. I'm interested to see which one's in the movie.
oh wow, but yeah, but there's been the fourth wall breaking in part that has what we've seen in trailers and preview promotional materials and stuff seems to be that Disney as a corporation and kind of the MCU and stuff is not going to be off limits, right? And so I feel like a big part of the success of this movie is going to be how much they're going to let loose, like how much free reign they're going to have, or like is it going to be like just a little bit, just so they can say they did it but not really go full throttle. And I hope that they have the wherewithal to be like, no, like this is the place to have that kind of release and be like, no, we're just going to make fun of ourselves and nothing is going to be off limits. Because you're right, I
Well,
think that is kind of like the viewing experience from that perspective is very cathartic.
yeah.
Like
Well,
we we get to dabble in things we don't feel like we're allowed to, or something like that.
yeah,
There's some taboo.
a safe dangerous, right? And I think we're coloring this with our own psychology, because now I'm going to psychoanalyze us, but we're not people who would say filthy words or make dirty jokes. But it's like, but this is a safe space to appreciate those, as opposed to going to like, I don't know, I was going to say a Judd Apatow movie, but I'm even thinking of like two tiers beyond a Judd Apatow movie of those kind of really kind of raunchy comedies or some such. Um, well, and I think you pinpointed a really good question, because I think it is on brand to make fun of Marvel and Disney in the Deadpool space. It appears that Marvel understands that it has found itself in troubled waters, and I think making fun of that can be really fruitful. But there is a danger, I would say, of going to that well too many times. So I really appreciated Conan O'Brien was talking on his podcast recently about how if he had a guest who was not doing that well, and the guest paused and turned to the audience and said, "Sorry, I'm not doing so well." The audience would actually turn on the guest at that moment because they were like, "Oh, I worked hard to come out to this show for one special night, and you're telling me I got a bad one." And I think there's this similar danger there. Like if you can tease us for loving this stuff, but at some point if you go too far and say like this is all really dumb and you shouldn't care about any of this, I think that will sour the audience in some ways. And maybe that's, you know, Madam Web also recently proved that it can all be really dumb if taken just a little falsely. So I wonder if we're at risk of that.
Yeah, no, I can definitely see that, and I think doing the make fun of Marvel and Disney only works if this movie is also really good. You know what I mean? Like like if the movie itself is delivering, and then so because I think you have to counter that reminder of sort of the downturn, you have to counter that with, but we're so back, right? Like if it's only dwelling on, oh, look how much we've messed up, right? Or like let us remind you of how dissatisfied you've been with our movies lately. Then yes, I think that is dangerous.
Kind of say I think we should just throw a few thoughts towards Deadpool 2 before I think we're both like anxious to try to preview what we know and what we think about the new one perhaps coming out. But I think you painted it correctly that Deadpool 2 is the lesser of the two, but it is not a bad movie at all. I would say it suffers a little bit from being a little weaker in its plot, that it just doesn't have that kind of cohesive rom-com structure. It's a little messier, it's a little shaggier. And so it fails, but there's really like a lot of really good laugh out loud bits and good characters. I was already in my Letterboxd review to say this film criminally wasted Zazie Beetz from Atlanta and other things.
I
Who
didn't
I think
remember
is
she was in this
incredible.
movie. I
I
was looking
know.
it up again. I was like, wait, Zazie Beetz is in this?
Yes, but the thing is, like, and I'm not going to get this exactly right in the spot, but I think I was looking at my watch and it was like 45 minutes, and Zazie Beetz is in the thumbnail, so I'm like, I remember she's in this. I was like, she's still not here. Where is she? And that's where I was like, there's your Letterboxd review, because we all write them ahead of time in our heads, right? There's your Letterboxd. Is this film wastes Zazie Beetz? But then she gets two sequences. So she is, I believe she's Domino, and her superpower is luck. And these two like bravado sequences where she's in the middle of a fight and absolutely everything breaks her way, and the refrain is, Deadpool says, "Is luck a superpower?" And she's like, "Yeah, it is." And it's kind of confirming that in these sequences. They're so good, and she's such a movie star in those moments. I'm like, I'm here for a Domino spinoff. But well, and I had also completely forgotten that Josh Brolin is in Deadpool 2,
Me too.
playing his second Marvel villain, although Cable, that's a little reductive of Cable and all his complexities. But this goes back to your point about the pop culture. Like, they call it out themselves. I think he calls him a Thanos looking dude or something like that. And so they kind of have their fun with it. And I guess that is well before the merger was even a whisper. So they might have thought that this is fine. They won't ever collapse into each other, but they seem to. So there's a lot to appreciate in Deadpool 2. It's still fun, even if it's not quite the heights of the original.
Well, you're also reminding me, first of all, yeah, I agree. I have to be honest, when I went back and looked at this, I didn't remember a whole lot about it. Like before I went back, I was like, I don't know if I could tell you what happens in Deadpool 2. Whereas I could probably with Deadpool 1, but Deadpool 1 is an origin story. So that might be cheating. You know what I mean? Like that's not fair to compare the two. But what you were saying just now reminded me that another big part of my reaction and kind of returning to these movies is I don't think I had remembered how intertwined Deadpool was with the X-Men already.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, because I think a lot of the reaction to when Deadpool and Wolverine got announced, and especially when the title got changed from Deadpool 3 to Deadpool and Wolverine, everyone was like losing their minds. And they're like, yes, finally. But if you go back, like within 10 minutes of the first Deadpool movie, Deadpool was making fun of Wolverine.
Yeah.
And he's like, it rhymes with Wolverine, right? Like it's like, like so it's always that's the thing I didn't realize, is that the connection, like Deadpool and Wolverine is not as weird a thing as it's sort of naturally leading to this in a lot of ways. And actually the other thing I really like about the Deadpool movies is that they use sort of B team, apologies to Colossus and Cable fans, but like, you know what I mean? Like they use the lesser, the recognizable but still lesser known X-Men to kind of like give you that X-Men experience, make this a mutant story, but at the same time, it's not like, Cyclops and Jean Grey aren't coming in and stealing the show. You know what I mean? Like it's like they're not being overshadowed. And I have to say, Colossus in the the first movie is so funny. I didn't remember.
I laughed a lot at him, and I really laughed a lot at Negasonic, and
Yeah.
particularly her girlfriend, who's just always cheerfully saying hi to Deadpool across the two movies. But I completely agree, and it's funny because they both, I mean, it's Deadpool, so they have their cake and they eat it too. They have these lesser X-Men, and then he makes the joke of, oh, it's such a big house, it's weird I only see you two. It's like the studio wouldn't pay for more. And like, that's a brilliant joke. I don't know how the legal rights in this all intertwine, but it makes me think a lot about what Sony is trying their darndest to do right now. Pre-order your Kraven the Hunter tickets, I guess, where they're trying to make the most of this one property they still owned. I think 20th Century Fox found a more successful version of that. And, if we're shouting out, we also just, Deadpool 2 has Juggernaut, and another, like we were saying about Logan, Juggernaut works so well as an R-rated hero, and getting him to say the line that you want him to say with the word you want him to say is so perfect, and it really comes together. And Juggernaut ends up being like actually kind of scary, which I don't often feel about him or any of the Spider-Man villains, if I'm being honest. Like they all just don't translate well out of the comics. They all look a little goofy, but it works here because of some of those choices. And also, just to shout out, one of my favorite moments is when all the McAvoy X-Men are hiding behind the door, not being seen by Deadpool. Like,
Yes.
it's just brilliant, because then it's like, it's the third level of having your cake and eating it too, because then they're actually there and we have paid for them, but we're not going to let it actually be a part of it. So it's really well done in that regard.
So we have two places we can go. I'll let you choose. One is, we talked a little bit at the beginning about why Ryan Reynolds is suited for Deadpool as a character. I want to switch back to Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. Like, what is it about Hugh Jackman that seems to have this longevity as a character? The other option, if you want to go in this other path, is, there is a movie that we have not talked about yet, in which Deadpool and Wolverine actually meet already. So I'll let you choose which one you want to do next.
I'm gonna rose Tico it and celebrate what I love instead of fighting what I hate, and
Nice.
say, I came to Hugh Jackman through Wolverine. I don't know if that's everyone or not, and so it was only later that I kind of learned he was a song and dance man, right? And I actually still haven't seen Greatest Showman, to my shame and to my Zendaya stats sadness, because I think that's the highest Zendaya movie I've never seen. But I remember when he hosted the Emmys or the Tonys really
I think the Tonys.
successfully. And I think Dan Harmon of Rick and Morty always joked for a long time that his only Emmy was for writing the song Hugh Jackman sang at the award show, despite his critical love for all his shows. So I find it really interesting that that's who they picked. And part of it that works so well is, I've already spoken highly of his physique, but part of it that really is important is that he's kind of a little guy, right? Because that fits Wolverine. That this, again, his casting predates when I always think of the Thor and Captain America's arrival as when we decided all our superheroes need to have like beyond human capacity muscles. And yet, Hugh Jackman has that kind of small stature, and he, especially by the time of Logan, it's a little dad bodish, but like perfectly. And it's, all kind of this rumpledness that defines that character so well. Seeing what a happy-go-lucky, funny guy Hugh Jackman is makes me appreciate the acting more, that it's not his personality, whereas Ryan Reynolds, it is his personality. Is that the right read? How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I'd say I think I was gonna say that the multidimensionality of Hugh Jackman, I think, is what makes him such a good fit for Wolverine. For the point I was making at the beginning of like, when you get Wolverine right, you have to get that complexity right. You have to. He can't just be gruff, and I think that the fact that Hugh Jackman has that other side to him, has the sort of like musical theater kid like outlook, right? It is partly what allows him to tap into that when he's portraying Wolverine, right? And also I'm sure it helps with the physicality of it too, right? There's something like, every time I watch Hugh Jackman in like a fight scene or something like that, and granted, I'm sure he's using stunt people or whatever for some of the time, but um, it's always super believable, but also really kind of, there's some sort of ballet element to it a little bit. Like it's very, or almost like, I shouldn't say ballet, but like there's something, his dance background I think is really helpful, because it sort of has like he's got the footwork of like a Gene Kelly almost when he's doing these fight scenes. Yeah. And so I'd say that like that's part of it. And he just really nails the line delivery when he has a one-liner. I think that's really crucial, because that can be really hard. Wolverine has like kind of ridiculous catchphrase, like, you know what I mean, like his one-liners can be very ridiculous on paper, but he somehow really sells it when he's saying it in person. I'm gonna bring us back to what you didn't want to talk about, because I just realized there's a connection.
Let me throw in one note on that to say that when I think about the first X-Men, I don't remember a lot of the details, but I always remember when Hugh Jackman delivered, like, they put him in the leather suit and he's like, "What, you didn't have any yellow spandex?" or something like that. And it was so funny. And I think it's exactly right that that's a dumb joke, but because he delivers it right, it works. And it is that kind of fourth wall break that might be necessary for this. But go ahead with your point.
Well, and the yellow suit's coming back for Deadpool and Wolverine,
Woo-woo!
Which is so fun.
Yeah.
Which again, the prospect of that seems so fun, because it's like a lot of the previous movies that have had Wolverine in them are so, like, those Bryan Singer movies, very serious. Like everyone is taking themselves very seriously. There's no quipping it. Like there's banter, right? But it's always very like the tone of the whole thing is always pretty serious and taking itself seriously. And so to see that, to see Wolverine in a Deadpool context, I think is going to be really fun. But anyway, so the connection I was going to make to, and the movie I referred to earlier, is X-Men Origins Wolverine, which I think is the worst X-Men movie, certainly the worst Wolverine movie. Also has Deadpool in it, and now I don't remember what the segue was going to be from what you were saying earlier, but we've danced around it enough. We gotta talk about it. So, Greg, do you know anything about the context of like in terms of canon, like Marvel canon? Like, what is this? Why did Deadpool appear in this movie in this way?
I mean, I keep putting a punching bag on Sony, but I think this was the moment when 20th Century Fox wanted to try to do what Sony has been trying to do with Spider-Man. So, the trilogy of X-Men movies happens from 2000 to 2006, and I think the reception of the third one, everybody kind of acknowledged that was pretty messy. I don't think we should try this again right away. And so we get this moniker on the Wolverine movie, X-Men Origins. And I believe the plan was like, hey, if this works, guess what? We got like 100 characters we have the rights to. We can do these endlessly and keep having them show up. And like, that's appealing. There's a lot that that could work about that. And X-Men 3 The Last Stand does a little of that with Jean Grey. It has this early example of de-aging where they send Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen to go recruit very young Jean Grey. I like how I just mix actors and characters there. Sure. That's very PT of me. He called himself out for that in the Kinds of Kindness
Yes,
review, which was very difficult in that movie. I just,
it is.
I agree. So I think they thought, like, let's go back and let's do that. And then what's funny looking at it now is I actually got mad watching it this week, not for anything too serious, except that they burn a bunch of really good X-Men that you could have built something around. Chief amongst them, your husband Gambit, who is Taylor Kitsch of Friday Night Lights / John Carter fame. And like, that's him at a height when Hollywood really thought this was the next guy. They're like, he's going to be in Battleship. This guy's going to rule. And it's just another example of like, nope, that's not it. And our friends in grad school at the time that came out were so angry because they wanted Sawyer from Lost, Josh Holloway,
Oh, that's
to
right.
play him,
Well,
which
that was like
stood out in my mind.
one of the first big instances of fan casting, I want to say, was that,
Yeah, I think
right?
that's right because we're in kind of wild early podcasting days, not early internet, but that next kind of fan dominated segment. So I think Deadpool is just another one of those, and they were like, if we're gonna make this work, we got to throw in and you're gonna need to correct my X-Men. Is it Emma Frost who has the diamond skin? Comes January Jones just doing some of the worst acting in X-Men First
Oh,
Class.
that's true.
Just shade to January Jones, who was so good on Mad Men and so bad at everything else. Because they were not sure everybody would follow Wolverine, it's like, let's build it out with a lot of these X-Men that people have wanted to see. And that's the beauty of X-Men. And I was making this pitch to my son, who's 9, because he's like, what are these movies? Or should I watch these with you? And I was like, the cool thing about X-Men is it's a deep bench. You have so many characters. And so I think they threw in Deadpool. This is a long way to your question, through a lot of ideas. I think they threw in Deadpool as in, oh, here are the 20 X-Men who we have legal rights to, who have the top grossing comics. And the comic was so hot at that moment, I think, let's get him in. Now, I'll let you tackle the confounding choice they made, which Deadpool himself has made fun of why did they have him sew his mouth shut? Can you explain anything about the Deadpool arc in that movie?
Okay. So first of all, that's not even, I mean, that's not even the first part of it. Like, so in the beginning of the movie, which I believe is trying to be kind of like a Suicide Squad-esque thing, right? It's like Stryker assembles this team of some obscure, some, like you're saying, more notable X-Men, and like also Dominic Moynihan,
saying
not to bring
somehow
it back to
Palpatine
Lost.
has returned. Yeah.
It's all, I was just like, wait, how many famous people are in this movie? This is so confusing. Anyway, but we meet Wade Wilson in that team. But it's Ryan Reynolds without like a weird face. Like, he hasn't yet to be mucked up like Deadpool, right? So like, and I was just like, I just don't understand this. Like, what is happening right now? like, because clearly he's fighting like Deadpool. He's got the Deadpool costume, but not the hood. And it's just Ryan Reynolds' perfect face, right? And with some samurai swords. And I'm just like, why are we doing this? And then later he shows back up. And part of this is because the plot of this movie is so incredibly convoluted. He shows, because I'm not even sure I could explain to you why he's there, because then and I guess spoilers for this movie, they say he dies, but then he comes back at the end as like this like Frankenstein kind of, like he's been experimented on just like Wolverine has, and then is sort of being controlled by Stryker to try to fight Wolverine. Again, kind of unclear why. And other than, we need them to fight each other or whatever, or like Stryker's crazy and trying to create the ultimate weapon next, right? So the confusing thing is, and they knew they were doing this because they make a joke about it in the movie. Wolverine, I think, says, "Oh, well, Stryker finally figured out how to keep your mouth shut," because they're making fun of him for being mouthy when he's Wade Wilson but not Deadpool. And then when he shows up, his mouth is sewn shut. He doesn't have any dialogue as Deadpool. he's basically a robot because Stryker is literally typing commands into his like old Apple computer. You know what I mean? Like being like decapitate Wolverine, and then he's like okay, and it really makes no sense. He has laser eyes somehow. Like all of his power set makes no sense, and the idea I think in the movie, which again doesn't make any sense, but in the movie they frame it as Stryker has experimented to the point where his goal is to make this ultimate weapon mutant, and like that has all the powers. It's kind of like if you've seen Secret Invasion, which is not a show, Disney Plus show I would recommend. And you didn't even make it to the end of that show, did you?
No,
okay,
I did
so,
eventually, but yeah,
okay.
just the name made me make that face. Jen
Yeah,
paused
you're like,
because I made a crazy face in the Zoom. Like, no, don't. But you're actually exactly right. Make the point, but I see where you're going.
So I guess my spoiler for this,
Yeah.
Amelia Clark's character in that at the end ends up like taking on all the powers of all these other mutants in a way that's kind of like at first you're like, oh, this is cool, and then you're like, this is weird, and makes her so overpowered they can never bring her back. Probably, like, I don't really know. So it's like that where it's like it doesn't make any sense if you know anything about Deadpool as a character, and it's totally undercutting what the charm of that character because he's not allowed to speak. He's not allowed to make any comments while he's fighting Wolverine. It just seemed really weird. It seemed like they wanted to use the name and contorted the character so much to fit the story they were trying to tell, which to begin with was not a very good story. And like, I don't know. So
yeah, I mean that largely summarizes it, and it's an interesting moment because it was shocking that Ryan Reynolds both looked so young, and then you're like, but not young enough, right? Because it is Ryan Reynolds. It's I mean the new Wolverine and Deadpool and Wolverine trailer makes fun of Paul Rudd not aging, which you're like, come on, Ryan Reynolds, like you're in that camp too,
right.
but so I met Ryan Reynolds on the much maligned and probably not that good television show Two Guys, a Girl, and a Pizza Place,
Oh, that's
which
right.
I think was one of his bigger breaks early on. Famous to me personally because the pizza place I used to go to in Somerville had the other actor as one of its employees up until that show premiered. So they had the newspaper announcing
Oh,
it.
wow.
And just dumb, but
like we knew him when, yeah.
Yeah, I'm confessing that this show should have died from memory, but like the quirky humor, like worked on a sitcom, right? It's like totally branded up as sitcom style humor, and then he went on to Blade Trinity, which I could have my memory wrong, but I think he used swords in Blade Trinity. And it's almost like the Marvel people were like, he was really good with swords in that. Let's transplant him over. Because what's crazy is the first action scene you alluded to, he has a scene where he kind of spins his swords to stop bullets in a way that is beyond what we've seen Deadpool do. And to your point, this is when he's Wade Wilson, not when he's Deadpool. It's just this crazy thing.
Maybe some comic book reference can correct me, but like I think that makes no sense. Like I don't get it. Like I don't.
Well, and then the only other thing I wanted to add to your apt description of that is I believe then he has samurai swords in his arms like Wolverine has Wolverine claws,
Yes.
right? Like it's so dumb, and like it doesn't take much to think about how that just really doesn't work in basic biology and physiology. So I can't explain it, and as I understand the history, and I'll confess that this is loose, is I think that's when the studio's like, yep, Deadpool's done. Like, there's no chance of this coming back. And I believe it was Ryan Reynolds really pushing it and saying, like, no, I can do this and I can do this right. Won't you give me a chance? And I think he even kind of cut together a demo reel of what it could be. And that's what got them to take a chance on Deadpool. So if I have that history right, and it's the internet, so who knows if I do, then I think he deserves a lot of credit in bringing that back and rightfully found that there is something meaningful and special here. But it's so bizarre an origin story for them. It does help explain that Hugh Jackman and Ryan Reynolds must have been friends on that movie, and that's part of how he got talked into coming back.
Right. So I guess if that's if that is what butterflies affects their friendship, then I suppose I don't want to take this movie back, but like it's like I didn't remember how bad the movie was. It's like because there's also this whole romantic plot line where, you know, because and this is in the Wolverine being a lumberjack in Canada is in the comics. Like that's the thing that's from the comics. But in the movie, it's basically they cut to, and then he has this deep loving relationship with this person that we have never seen before and don't know. And then at the end, it's I don't know. I guess I'm spoiling this movie all the way, but like it's it makes no sense. And then like even like
Yeah.
sorry, it's just this movie was so bad it was really funny to me. The opening montage of first of all, we haven't mentioned
Oh, yes. I forgot what they were.
Leave Schreibner, if I'm saying his name correctly, as Sabretooth.
Yeah. A recasting, but yes.
And like the opening montage is him and Wolverine fighting through every war throughout history and being like, "You're my brother. We stick together." And their phrase, I think, is "back to back." That's like their move. They fight back to back. And again, I was just like, you know, maybe I missed out on a Sabretooth comic somewhere, but I'm like, why are we doing this? Like, what? Like X-Men, Wolverine didn't need a brother. Like
No.
I don't know. Like he was, yeah, I don't know. And then it's
Well, I was just going to say, in regards to the spoilers, this is our long take review, wholehearted endorsement of not rewatching this movie. So don't worry about the
yes,
spoilers. Like, this is one you should not feel is necessary, even though, as Jen pointed out, it does have both of these characters in it. Your time is much better spent rewatching the first two the first two Deadpools and Logan. That's our sincere endorsement.
that's
If
your
you're trying
starter.
to get the most, grab those three. Yep.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah.
A name we have not said, but should be said, is, of course, James Mangold, director of Academy Award nominee Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, who I will say, who I will say didn't quite nail it on The Wolverine, the second standalone Wolverine movie, but did nail it on Logan. And I don't know his relationship to the comics or so on, but I think figured out and worked this character the right way eventually. So I would say, I guess if you do the starter pack and you need one more, maybe throw in the Wolverine. Its plot is way too complicated and such, but it's fun and has some really cool action sequences. One of which seems to be lifted right from Mission Impossible, which is just, you know, long take review canon that you should mix all of these things.
Yeah, I remember that movie because that movie I think critically got pretty panned when it came out. It's not that bad. It's fine.
No.
It's like it's neither great nor bad. I think, and it does have some questionable scenes where Wolverine is like, "How do you use chopsticks?"
Well, and to your
So
point
culturally, it could be
about
problematic. I haven't revisited it. Yeah.
to your point about the opening of that of Wolverine Origins, the Wolverine starts with the bombing of Nagasaki as like kind of fun background, and you're like, I don't think we should be doing
Oh,
that,
right.
right? I mean, it
Yeah.
actually serves a larger point in the plot, but you're like, I don't think we should be making light of these events. I'm looking at you, the Eternals, right? That kind of threw that in as a plot point as well.
Oh, that's right.
So it's not uncomplicated, but it does have some pretty good Wolverine action within the film.
I would
I
say
think
just go read the comics that movie's based on because they're really
good
good.
point.
I want to say it's Chris, and my neighbor and friend Colby is probably going to listen to this and be like, "Why does Jen not remember these comics I gave her to read?" I believe it's Chris Claremont's run where Wolverine goes to Japan. It's really good. That's all I'll say. Just go read it, and then you'll understand why the movie The Wolverine is like why it's not good.
Yeah.
I mean, as a movie unto itself, it's fine, but I think then that's probably why people weren't happy with it.
And then it's not going to help you prepare, but if you want more mutants after that, you got to go First Class and Days of Future Past, because you're just going to have more fun, yes, I would say, than any of them.
And then you'd be like, why didn't we make more movies with James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender as these characters? Because they're really great.
But then you'll watch Dark Phoenix and you'll be like, that's why.
Yeah, that's true.
It's so bad. Like was that post-pandemic, I believe. I think that's one of the first times I was like, well, I
I
guess
think
I'll try to
so.
go to the movies again. And it was really bad. And I had never seen the New Mutants. Like I confessed, I pulled up the thumbnail on Disney Plus. I didn't realize Anya Taylor-Joy is in that, and Maisie
Wait, what?
Williams. Yeah, they're part of the New Mutants, which New Mutants, I believe, came out after the merger and got basically zero press. It was I think it was a Dumptober, not a Dumpuary, but it was like, let's just get it out there because we have to release it, or lose money on it. Now they would just get the tax write-off, I'm sure, but we're there. All right, we've dwelt on the things that we don't like, Jen, lest we lose our branding. Can you talk to me? I'm a skeptical superhero fan, a casual superhero fan, listening to this podcast an hour in. Despite that, what's your pitch on why people should be excited about Deadpool and Wolverine, and why they should consider buying a ticket, even if they're skeptical?
So here's my pitch: it's the buddy factor. And I think they very smartly leaned into that in marketing this movie, right? Originally, it was just called Deadpool 3. Then they were like, oh, wait, it's Deadpool and Wolverine. And then the trailers were like, oh, yeah, this is as much a Wolverine movie as it is a Deadpool movie, which I think is very smart and is honestly going to get a lot more people to see it than if it were just a Deadpool movie that maybe had some Wolverine scenes in it that they didn't play up, right? Like, not to be super invested and have a conflict of interest in my own hype draft, because I did draft this movie when we did that. So I have a conflict of interest there. But here's my pitch: is that Wolverine. So this is, I'm going to be sort of riffing off the critical conversation we just had about the Origins movie. I was like, Wolverine doesn't need a brother, right? But he does need a friend. Like we've kind of had, and I think that's what that movie tried to do but failed. They're like, oh, like Wolverine is such this lone wolf kind of character as we usually know him or usually see him. What if his tragic backstory is like he had a brother that he had a deep bond with and it went poorly, right? I think that was probably the pitch for that movie. And then, that in of itself doesn't sound terrible. But I think what the magic of this movie could be is that it's basically a buddy comedy with these two really like rude and surly characters, right? And I think we haven't seen anything to the contrary so far. I think all of the trailers, and I think the sort of the Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman banter on the internet, I think has also really helped this a lot, and hopefully will give us, like, I hope that translates into the movie in a big way. But I would say that, yeah, like Wolverine in his history in films has been treated pretty seriously, right? And has been always kind of this loner character. And I feel like this is the first opportunity to like have some fun with him as a character, while still not losing everything that we love about him, right? So I think that's going to be the thing. And I think the trailers really projected that in a strong way, that he's sort of like, get out of my face. I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to talk to anybody. Wolverine sitting alone at a bar, right? And then Deadpool's like, hey, buddy. Like, and sort of forces him into this friendship, right? So that would be my pitch, is like, even if you didn't totally care for the Deadpool movies, even if you aren't a huge X-Men fan, I feel like the buddy comedy aspect of this movie could be a lot of fun just on its own.
You said the F word, fun. And I think you and I both love Marvel. We have stayed loyal to Marvel far longer than everybody else, including
True.
PT, who keeps taking a pass on the Marvel podcast. I think this is a reminder that these movies are supposed to be fun. They're not supposed to be homework. They're not supposed to be, stakes of the world. Let's have a deep message. They're stupid in the best possible way. And I think, that's to me the power of the Deadpool brand, is reminding us that it is fun. And everything you just listed could mean it's super fun. And my fingers are crossed. I don't need to be worried about the hype draft because the embargo just lifted on Twisters this morning, and I am very confident of where I'm sitting. It sounds like it is very fun. So,
oh boy.
We need a musical stinger or something for hype draft talk, because we do pepper it in whenever we can. So I think this could be really fun and like I said, if I love Deadpool for any reason, it's poking holes in what seems too full of itself. And that's where Marvel is for me. I love it all dearly, but it feels way too full of itself. And like I think this is going to have a lot of references, but not ever feel like anybody's going to miss out, right? So as we transition, I think Jen and I's intention, well, we don't know anything that's real spoilers, but we'll stick to what's visible in trailers and maybe a little bit of internet rumors, but nothing has been confirmed, so who knows? But if you don't like internet rulers, we'll try to flag rumors. We'll try to flag them. The trailer leans heavily into the TVA, which is from Loki, but doesn't seem to be our TVA. Seems to be a different TVA. It's got different colors, different uniforms. So if it's some new modern version or if it's some kind of multiverse, but I think that to me tells us that this is going to be a multiverse story, which actually, instead of making it feel like you have to know everything, frees you from all of these continuities. And I think that's powerful because if I had one worry, and I know we're hyping, but if I had one worry, it would be that this somehow undoes Logan's absolute perfect ending for the Wolverine character. And so I think if this establishes this is a different Wolverine,
Right.
everything that happened. This is a very Lost centric
I
episode.
think they have said
Yeah.
that it will not.
Okay. Then I think I'm game, and it should be really fun and give us the chance to play. Um, I think I said on our Marvels podcast, where I see the fault of the MCU right now is everybody caught up during the pandemic. We weirdos were in it from the start. We kept up with everything. And everybody caught up on the pandemic, got that amazing Avengers Endgame moment, and then coming out of the pandemic, literally risked their lives in some cases to like rush out and see Black Widow and Shang-Chi. And it didn't connect in meaningful ways as time went on. And a lot of my friends who loved the MCU because of WandaVision or some of those pandemic experiences now are saying like, well, nothing has been that meaningful. It feels so random. I think Deadpool and Wolverine is going to really kind of take the heavy-handed multiverse stuff and just be like, it's so dumb, everybody. Let's make fun of it together.
Right. It'll be part of the fourth wall breaking as opposed to the like, this is the story we'll tell. This is the multiverse saga, right? Like, which has a very self-serious tone to it. So yeah, I totally agree. And I do think that the multiverse aspect of it does make me feel like this Hugh Jackman, even though it's Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, it's not going to be a Hugh Jackman Wolverine that we've seen before. It'll be a new one from another universe, because they keep implying like that he comes from a world that like imploded, right? Like that, like some sort of extinction event happened. Right. And he couldn't save them, and that's his baggage, right? So because of that, I feel like it can't be any other Wolverine we've seen in any other movie. And I think that'll be really good for two reasons. One, because it will, like you said, sort of free up the storytelling. So it'll be lighter and it won't be so burdened with having to connect with other things. But it's also going to be really good for Hugh Jackman, right? Because, like, yes, he's played this character for so long. He's really good at playing this character. People love him as this character. But at the same time, he's in a different place now in his life than he was during any of the other movies that he's made, right? So, like, and I think he thought probably Logan was going to be his last time playing Wolverine. And so I think this is an opportunity for him to have a little bit of creative license to like not feel like he has to just re-inhabit the same role he's played all his life, right? And have a little bit for him to have fun with it too. And actually, in the interviews that he's given, when people have asked him why did he come back, it's because he said it was fun. So he was like, it sounded really fun, and Ryan Reynolds is really fun to hang out with, and like so that to me also bodes well. I think two red flags are potentially here. One is because it's a multiverse story, if it's all cameos and no story, and all Easter eggs and no story, then we're in trouble, right? Because it could be, especially with Deadpool, especially with the fourth wall breaking, if that's all there is and it's not there, they haven't put in the work for the plot of the movie itself, then we have a problem, I think. But yeah, so
I like that as a potential downfall, and I think you're right. What comes to mind is Multiverse of Madness, where Doctor Strange and America flash through like 6 dimensions
yep.
at once, and it's a great bravura sequence. But if it's that, but it's like 10 different movies we know, I think that's gonna feel like too much. And you know, I think Kevin Feige listens to the podcast, so if they go back and hear your comments on the first Deadpool, I think that's right. Like, if they can put an emotional core on this, then they can get as zany as they want, as long as we believe the characters and we believe their motivation. And it does seem to be, again, something is threatening the entire multiverse, and so we're going to unite these two characters because this Wolverine has maybe come close to stopping it before. There are lots of potential Marvel things tied up in that. Something big and stupid like Galactus could be here, right? I think
True.
he's been cast for Fantastic Four, but it could be like a way to have fun with the sillier parts of canon, and these different versions of these characters. I think the only other real concern I have, and this comes from watching a lot of streaming services with advertisements now, they are way overexposing these two actors right now. Like, no shame on Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman for getting paid, but Hugh Jackman and Ryan Reynolds tell me to turn off my cell phone every time I go to the movie theater.
Oh, that's right.
They tell me to go buy DiGiorno pizza. My son now has seen it so many times he can recite Wolverine getting his claws taken away to make Heineken beer cans for Deadpool and Wolverine, and like on and on and on. And look, like, that's just part of the business. It gets the movies made. It helps, like, no shame on it. But like that, I think for me, we're in the 25th year of it. That's part of what hurt Phantom Menace. You could not turn your head without seeing Phantom Menace everywhere in 1999. So the movie seems like, oh, okay, more of the same. So I think there's a little risk at that. I think they got to be just a little more careful than they've been,
But here's
respecting that they get paid.
but here's the thing, Greg. It seems like it's working. Um, the news cycle, I want to say it's this week, was this article I'm looking at from Forbes, is from like a couple days ago, July 3rd. 165 million projected box office for opening weekend, I think. They're saying it could be record breaking. It could beat Inside Out 2. It could be the winner of the box office. There's no mention of Twisters in here. I'm sorry. Like, it's
So they're wrong. So it's a bad source. Well, and the seriousness of the hype draft is, in terms of box office, I think Twisters now has a Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 problem, which they are coming out a week before this behemoth, just like Mission Impossible got too close to Barbenheimer last summer. So I think Twisters is going to suffer because everybody who's a once a month movie type person, which I hear exists, but sounds strange to me, is going to pick Deadpool and Wolverine unless they have superhero fatigue.
The other marketing things that I'll mention is, in my movie theater, I haven't actually done this yet, but I was there seeing another movie. I can't remember which one, but they have a Deadpool and Wolverine claw machine where you can get the friendship bracelet. But you can't just put money in it. You have to buy a ticket to Deadpool and Wolverine.
So smart.
It's so smart.
Yeah. I saw one of those at a Regal, but my pre-order was at AMC, so I couldn't even use it. Like, it has to be that
it might only
theater.
Be Regal. I'm Regal, so yeah, that's probably why. And I haven't done it because at the time I didn't have time. I had to leave. But I was like, I can't wait to come back and do it, because it's a claw machine and it's Wolverine. Like, come on.
Who doesn't want that too? Yeah, yeah.
And the other thing is the popcorn bucket game for this.
Oh,
and
yeah.
just like, I haven't heard anything about that lately, but when it came out and Ryan Reynolds was like, "Hold my beer, Dune Part 2. We've got a popcorn bucket for you," and it's like the most ridiculous looking thing. It's just Wolverine with his like mouth wide open. It's bad. It's bad.
Well, that alludes to something that, this is my personal hype level. I'm a little sad about this one because it's the only Marvel movie this year. I really love seeing Marvel movies with my son. My son has seen endless marketing for this movie, but he's known from the beginning
he can't go.
He can't go because it's rated R. And respecting that there should be R-rated. It's a shame of timing. If he'd gotten to see Captain America this month, I forget when it was supposed to come out, then that would be different. But it's kind of leaving out a chunk of the audience, which I feel a little bad for. They don't have Happy Meal toys for it though, so I guess that's a win.
Oh yeah, that would be really bad. That would be questionable. Um, even for McDonald's, I feel like sometimes they push toys that I'm just like, kids aren't going to see this movie. Like, what are you doing? But yeah, so, and I think in terms of, the movie industry narrative, Oscar pundit narrative, not that this is an Oscar into contention, but like the critics that I follow, all of them kept being like, slow your roll. This is an R-rated movie, like you're saying, and therefore cannot reach the heights of an Inside Out 2 because family, like there's a whole quadrant of people who cannot go see it. But I think the narrative is like, well, but the box office projections are so high that apparently that doesn't seem to matter. So either kids are going to see this movie and they're not supposed to, or like a bunch of adults are coming out of the woodwork being like, finally, like I want an R-rated movie to go see at the theater. So I don't know which one it is, but we'll see.
So my AMC has one disaffected teenager who sits at the exact center of 20 screens, and 1 through 10 are on the left, 11 through 20 are on the right. As long as you pass by that teenager, you have free reign to go to whatever theater on your half you want. So what's been funny for me, because I'm so far past this age, is I will often go see, like a horror movie that's rated R, and the endless kids sneaking in. Scream was a big one. Scream clearly appealed to the like 14, 15-year-olds. We'll call that the Jenny Ortega effect, I imagine. Mm-hmm. And like, it was like, I have not seen levels of sneaking into the movie theaters. What's so funny is because it's all reserved seating, they can look and see where to sit and not even like be near anybody.
It used to be somebody,
yeah, exactly. So I mean, that doesn't really affect the box office because they're buying tickets. I mean, maybe it'll help Twisters. If anything, I think Twisters is coming in at PG-13, so they'll buy that ticket and then show up at Deadpool anyway. So, I think it's fine that Marvel is everything and doesn't always go to the 4 quadrants. There weren't any kids at Oppenheimer, last year's box office champion. So I think it'll do just fine. My question for you, outside of those kind of business questions, well, number one, how long till you have a Wolverine popcorn bucket? And number two, do you think this will change the current trajectory of the MCU? Will it? I mean, the trailer makes jokes. Will it save the MCU? Does the MCU need saving? What do you think?
Right. Deadpool literally calls himself Marvel Jesus in the trailer. And so, yeah, I think that is a huge question at the top of a lot of critics' minds. I think this movie is going to be a big success, but actually I don't think that's going to really translate into the larger MCU, because I do feel like it is mostly going to be a standalone movie. And again, I could be really wrong, but I think based on everything we've just said in terms of like, well, it's going to be a multiverse story, but in a way that's like going to be lean into the sort of like free play of it all, as opposed to tying it into what we've already seen or other movies or future movies. You know what I mean? And yes, it's using the TVA, but it's like Loki's not showing up. You know what I mean? It's Owen Wilson, right? Like, you know what I mean? It seems lightly connected, but not moored to the MCU proper. And so I don't know. I feel like this doesn't necessarily translate into the future of the MCU. It could get people excited for Marvel movies again. But I don't know if it will put the MCU as a long-term storytelling machine back on track, if that makes sense. I mean, I would love that. I love people to be back in on Marvel and not be making fun of it all the time.
Well, and I mean, I always go back to Joanna Robinson calls the current moment the wobble, right? And I really like that as language for MCU, because I think it is wobbling, but that doesn't mean it's fallen down, right? Like, it's not at the height it was, and I think it never will be, as we've talked about in every Marvel review since Endgame, I think. But I do think that you're right, that this is, to me, just its own strand. Like, I think it will make people remember how much fun they had at Marvel movies, but and I do think the Easter egg references will probably be off the charts. Like, not since Loki's Netherworld, I forget what that place was called. Will we see the
The
level
end
of
of
kind of
time,
the
right?
end of time? Yeah, not since Loki's End of Time will we have seen so many crazy references. And I do want to get your temperature on some internet rumors still before we close this discussion out in that regard. But I do think it's not going to get people to be like, oh, that was so much fun. I'm going to go check out the Marvels and Shang-Chi and Black Widow and on and on and on and on. Uh, I think we're just not where we used to be, and Marvel taking this time to kind of set clear plans is more likely to help than anything. I do like in the cell phone ad, Deadpool is saying something like, and then in Secret Wars they're going to finally introduce. So they are already playing with that, and they know what's there, and I think that level of winky humor is really going to be kind of key to success here.
The other thing too I'll say is like a warning is like if someone is going into this movie expecting this to be the full launch of Marvel X-Men,
Mm,
right? Because that has also been highly anticipated and hotly
true.
tracked of like when is that happening? When are the X-Men kind of re-entering the MCU now that they legally can, right? Like, and I feel like if you go into this movie expecting some heralding of like now X-Men are part of the MCU, I think you're going to be disappointed, right? Like I
Yeah.
think this is going to be a fairly contained story about Deadpool and Wolverine. Hugh Jackman is not signing on for 10 more movies. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like and as you said earlier, I think it's going to be a Han Solo situation in terms of recasting him. I think people are going to be
Mhm.
really harsh on whatever poor person
Yeah.
takes on the role after him. But there are rumors about casting a new Wolverine, right? Or like fan casting, like that's happening, isn't it? Like
Yeah,
on
I
the
mean, there's
internet.
a lot of talk about. It seems like we're in a space where nobody really knows, and since there's all those like comicbook.net, comicbookresources.com, they just endlessly spin up a million articles, and so it's really hard to see any grain of truth in them at this point. But you're right. I mean, look to Quicksilver appearing in WandaVision. Look to the bonus scene at the end of the Marvels. Like, people really want to see those X-Men because they are. And X-Men 97 just confirmed, like, these are really good characters and you can tell really strong stories. But I don't think we're there yet either. I think this is going to be a pass. We are much more likely to get some cameos from previous X-Men than we are any preview of new X-Men. Although I will just throw out, rewatching Logan, I was like, Daphne Keene as Project or X-23,
Mm-hmm.
throw her right in. Like, send Kamala Khan to recruit her wherever she is in Canada. Like, let's
Yes.
get her right into that Young Avengers model. Like, that would be so good. And she was obviously just so good on Acolyte and was so good in Logan. So, um, yeah. All right. So Jen will carefully time mark this. Sorry to make promises for your editing skills and your so on, but internet rumors for what kind of wild cameos we might have in this. What have you seen, or what are you hoping for?
So I'm trying not to hope for anything. I
Hmm.
actually I don't think I am hoping for anything. I'm just so excited to see Hugh Jackman as Wolverine again. I don't really care about anything else, honestly. Um, which I think again, I think is the big draw for a lot of people. It's going to get a bunch of people who wouldn't normally go see Deadpool 3 but are going to come
Yeah.
out for this. The big one I've seen that I just rolled my eyes at is Henry Cavill. Have you seen this?
I
That Henry
have
Cavill
seen
is going to
this.
show up as Wolverine? And I'm just like, look, everybody. Like, first of all, I really like Henry Cavill. I think he was actually quite a good Superman. Just was in terrible Superman movies.
Mm.
And like I love him on The Witcher. Like I think he's great. But do I need to see him as Wolverine? No. And he has everybody. He's got so many other things to do. Like he's gonna have a baby. Uh, he's doing like some Amazon Warhammer Amazon
Mm.
show or movie because he's obsessed with painting the Warhammer figures. Um, he's apparently Highlander, like he's doing a Highlander thing. Like he's very busy. He doesn't need to be Wolverine. Like let's just calm down.
Mm. Mm.
Like I get that he has the he has sort of the persona that I think he could be a pretty good Wolverine probably if he wanted to. Although according to, like, based on what you were saying earlier, he's probably too large, just physically to be to be an actual, like, authentic Wolverine. But
I'm
like,
picturing
yeah, I
him
don't know.
reloading his fists in Mission Impossible right now. Yes, that's a big guy. Absolutely.
So yeah, so that's the big one that I've seen that I was just like, really? Come on, like, let's simmer down, everyone. Um,
That reminds me of right before Multiverse of Madness, a film that's getting a lot of shout outs tonight. There were all these rumors that Tom Cruise was going to appear as alternate dimension Tony Stark. And I'm like, that just feels too fan wishy. I don't think they do that. But ahead of Multiverse of Madness, there were rumors that John Krasinski would appear as Reed Richards and Patrick Stewart as Professor X. And spoilers for that movie, those were true and out there. So
but I
there
also
are
think
some
that was a
leaks.
good example about how to do this incorrectly.
Yeah.
Because people were just mad about those because they were like, "Oh, you dangled those characters in our faces and then undercut the significance of them being in this movie." Again, I'm really trying to say that without spoiling what actually happens. But like, you know what I mean? Like, people, it backfired because people were
Yeah.
like, "Well, that doesn't count." um, so
Well, and
yeah,
that helps me with my wish list. So, we didn't mention in the trailer talk a number of scenes in the trailer. They are fighting in front of a smashed 20th Century Fox logo, which is hilarious to me,
yep,
and I think portends that we are. To me, what's open right now is anything in that batch of superhero
hmm
movies, and I guess it's still internet rumor, but it seems confirmed that Jennifer Garner has some role in this movie as Elektra, which is hilarious to me. My weird wish list one, and this comes off of an appearance in the film Free Guy. I have heard maybe a Chris Evans, not as Captain America, but as Johnny Flame, which would
Oh no,
crack me up. So
that would be very
if
funny.
that's in there, I think that's the right brand of humor. So those are my two that I've thought sounded very funny. And so we'll see.
Well, they in the
Again,
first
who
Deadpool
knows?
movie, they show a, like, it's like a trading card with Green Lantern on it.
Yes, that's
Is that
right.
right?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
yeah, so
Yes.
like, yeah, I think that's the right type of cameo. The like, isn't this an embarrassing thing from our history that we want to bring back? I think that's the right
Yeah.
mindset to have. I yeah, and actually the Jennifer Garner thing fits too because the Elektra movie and the Ben Affleck, there's a Ben Affleck Daredevil movie too, right? Those
Yeah.
were so terrible
Yeah.
that it would be perfect to bring it back and be like, "Hey, everybody, like, remember these movies that nobody liked?" Um, is there someone from the current MCU canon as their character that you would want to see? I don't. I'm not saying that that's realistic that we would see them, but
I mean, this is cheating a little. One of the current trailers shows a spinny, glowy circle. So Wong or Doctor Strange seems potential there, unless they're manifesting teleport. Maybe Ned. It's Ned there doing that. I'd actually rather see Ned than
being
those
like,
other
"I have
two.
my own sling ring now." Yeah, yeah, yeah. I would love to see She Hulk.
Ah,
Deadpool and
well,
She Hulk both breaking the fourth wall would make me really happy. I think
that would be great.
the
Well,
universe might explode if that happens, but like, like, um,
again, aforementioned Joanna Robinson always says that one of Feige's greatest strengths is taking the less loved properties and making them integral to the future. And I think She-Hulk would be ripe for that because She-Hulk is really good, and internet chuds, kind of review bombed it because they didn't like that it was a woman and blah blah blah. So I think that's a great call. That pulling her in would be really
we
fun,
could
and
have
just have them
She
talk
Hulk,
to each other.
Tatiana Maslany's She Hulk, Charlie Cox's Daredevil, and then Jennifer Garner's Elektra. Super awkward. It would be really awkward. With some
I
joke about
mean,
like somehow they're, yeah.
now this is just pure way over speculating, but like, do Avengers Endgame again with a lineup of like Avengers Assemble moment with them all running, but it's all these randos would
Oh yeah.
kill me. Like, it would just destroy me, and it seems like something this
Uh,
film would try. But
we also haven't
yeah,
mentioned the, oh no, what's her name? She was on The Crown. It's not Elizabeth Debicki. It's Emma Corrin. Do you know who I'm talking about? She
no,
plays. Oh, you haven't watched The Crown.
no.
Um,
But
she
Debicki was
plays a
really
young
good in
Diana on
Maxine.
The Crown. I think her name
Okay,
is Emma Corwin. Corrin.
bald
Yes.
in the trailer.
Yes. So she plays a character who is like Professor X's sister. That's why she's bald, I guess.
I guess, yeah.
I assumed you would know about this. So now I'm frantically looking up
I
to
know the
confirm.
actress you mean just from pictures of the premieres and stuff, but
Cassandra Nova is the
but
character.
part of what we're talking about is also just that they've kept the plot pretty low key here. I
That is
mean, we
true.
don't know a lot about what's going to happen. So, yeah, we don't know those things. And part of that is not having Happy Meal toys and action figures around like way early and so on. So, yeah, there are advantages to those things.
But I think she could be a fun villain
Yeah,
from what we've seen.
definitely.
So
I was a huge fan of Legion, which was isn't that Professor X's son?
it's
It
the
was
one with
an
Dan Stevens.
yeah.
I
It
haven't
was a
watched that.
great show. I only watched the first season, but it was phenomenal.
Many
Almost
people have told me to
phenomenal
watch
enough
that. I
to
have not
make
listened.
to watch the second season, almost. But I never got there.
Now I'm just trying to think of other random things that are in the trailers. There's an Ant-Man head, right?
Yep.
Like
Yep.
a giant Ant-Man head. So yeah, I mean, it's gonna be fun either way. Even if the story is terrible. This is sort of what I said on our hype draft episode. I'm like, even if the movie is not good, it will still be a good time.
Well, and again, the last kind of wish I'll put on the list is I'm just going back to the F word, fun, which is I just want to have fun. If I'm laughing and giggling, I really actually if I could go through this movie and not once think about the fate of the MCU, because I do think that's weighing on us right now
Yeah.
as major Marvel fans. It's like we are saddened that what we once loved and shared with so many people is now becoming kind of an insulated thing. And so I think if I can not have any of that in my mind, then we'll go for it. Now, I still don't want you to win the hype draft, but I will say I went so far when tickets went on sale. I forget where I was. I was somewhere very fancy.
You were on a beach.
Oh, that's right. I was on a beach in the Bahamas, and I turned to my wife and I was like, "This date, mark it out. I'm leaving home to be at a 3:00 showing," which I don't pull that trigger a lot. I'm there opening night almost every time, but it's like a 9:00 usually. But this time I was like, I'm not giving the internet a chance. I'm showing up as early as I can. So I think I have 3:00 even like the day before or something. Like, it's the first ever possible screening I could get to.
Nice.
So I'm
I
excited.
think I'm doing opening evening. But this is one of the rare times that I've actually pre-bought 2 rounds. 2 screenings.
I love
So
to
I'm gonna
hear
go
that.
Friday morning too.
Yeah.
I'm gonna drop my kids off at camp and then go see a 9:00 IMAX screening.
I love it.
Which I was like, the fact that there's a 9 a.m. screening, first of all, speaks volumes to how much demand they expect for this movie. Because I haven't seen one of those in a really long time. I think Oppenheimer 70 millimeter IMAX was like 10 or 10:30, right? That's usually the earliest I can get. So yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. I think if it has the level of cameo / Easter eggs we're talking about, you're going to be smart, and maybe I'll book one too. That way I can be smart as well. I think my kids are out of town that week, so beautiful. I'll go 5 times. So Phantom Menace numbers.
Amazing. All right. This was a great conversation, Greg. We want this movie to be fun. I think our conversation on it was very fun. Tell folks where they can find you and what you're up to right now.
I do want to say that somewhere along the way, when you were referencing how Wolverine needed a friend, I have on an internet tab open right now the Like a Prayer lyrics that I was going to recite to you in response to that comment, but I never got to it, so I'll leave that tab unopened.
Maybe I can try to drop the music at the end.
So people can find me on the internet, on social media. I'm at EyonCanon, EYEONCANON. Yes. Thank you for a great conversation, Jen, as always, of course. But it's always fun to be the last soldiers on the wall for Marvel. I think it's, perfectly fine that not everybody is still on board. But I do find when those friends who gave up ask me a couple questions about a movie coming up, how excited I get. So I'm always appreciative that we have this space. I hope listeners enjoyed the conversation. And if you didn't quit on us already, find us on Letterboxd or on Substack to throw in a comment, throw in what you're excited about, throw in where we got it wrong about the X-Men canon, or let's ask your favorite random X-Men power that you remember from some such piece of media. So Jen, PT's not here, so I will just remind people if they want new episodes of the podcast when they are first available, make sure you subscribe in your podcatcher of choice. As always, you can find the podcast on all the social media platforms we already mentioned, particularly Letterboxd and Substack, which is at longtakereview.substack.com, where you can also get Jen's fantastic reviews of The Acolyte. She called a whole bunch of stuff in episode 7 early, especially like some very different things that nobody expected. There were the things everybody expected. Jen got those. That's just a walk in the park for Jen. But Jen got a bunch of the more surprising things that got revealed. So she can't brag for herself, so I'll brag for her. Jen, did I get your web address right? And where else can they find you on the
I appreciate you always forget the long take review.
The long take review.
At substack.substack.com. It's okay. You don't actually have to do that because I have a separate outro bumper thing at the end. That's me explaining what that is. Though I appreciate it nonetheless. Yeah, I've been super busy between trying to record this podcast and load up episodes in advance so we can go on vacation next week, plus trying to keep up with House of the Dragon and The Acolyte. It's been a whirlwind summer. But yeah, you can find me on Instagram and Threads at Sopchockchai, SOPCHOCKCHAI, and on Letterboxd at Qui-Gon Jen. And this is where I drop like a prayer. That's what I'll do.
Do you want me to recite it? Here, I'll recite it. Jen, life is a mystery. Everyone must stand alone. I hear you call my name, and it feels like home.
Thanks for listening. You can follow The Long Take Review on Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. Subscribe for free to receive new podcast episodes as well as written reviews of films with Oscar buzz and new films and series from pop franchises like Star Wars and Marvel.